I'll say this. It's a hell of a time to be a Detroit sports fan. Wowzers. I am recording this at 11:57 p.m. on Sunday, and I think I speak for most Lions fans when I say that we're going to have trouble sleeping tonight, but not in typical Lions fashion, where we're going to be up all night tossing and turning because they lost a heartbreaker. The Lions pulled out an incredible ball game against the Los Angeles Rams in overtime, 26-20. We have a lot to cover in this episode, and I think Austin made a perfect suggestion for us to reboot this show when we did, because, I mean, you talk about material on top of material. The Lions are going to be what we're going to start with, but we got Tiger stuff to talk about. We got Michigan State football to recap. I mean, just a whole cornucopia of Detroit/Michigan-based sports for us to discuss in this episode. And we're going to start with the Lions. Like I said, 26-20 victory over the Los Angeles Rams, a game that got very hairy. I mean, let's be real. They kind of got their shit pumped in the second half, and they found a way to come back and win when they needed to. I would say it was a performance where a lot of people viewed the Lions as somewhat out of sync, especially the offense, which I think at its peak can be as dangerous an offense as there is in the entire sport. Now, the O-line got it going in overtime. Boy, oh boy, did the O-line and the running game get going in overtime. That was remarkable. I mean, David Montgomery, that was some I'm putting the team on my back shit. You know, and as much as we like this offensive line, and I do as well, I think it's one of the best offensive lines in football. I think that we had an idea that Brad Holmes knew what he was doing the second that he knew how important it was to build through the trenches, but they have two elite running backs. I mean, Montgomery, that was bully ball at its finest in overtime. I mean, he had guys on top of his shoulders and was just carrying them extra yardage. I mean, it was glorious to see. And that's, I mean, sounds corny, man, but that's grit. That's the identity of this football team. They are a reflection of their head coach. And I think establishing that culture, establishing that identity is one of the first things that Dan Campbell did correctly. But saying that you're going to have a certain identity and then actually having that identity are two completely different things. And we saw in overtime, they just wore down what I think was a tired Rams defense. Now, the Rams led in time of possession in this game, but when you look at the way the fourth quarter kind of played out, the Lions had the ball the last 2.5 minutes, essentially, outside of two plays for Los Angeles. You get the ball back in overtime after winning the coin toss. It just seemed like that D-line and that defense, which played pretty darn well for a majority of the ball game for Los Angeles, was just gassed, and they took it to them. It was brilliant. I think what I saw in this Lions game was a lot of what we saw last season, which is, on one end, spectacular, right? Last year was the best Lions team ever. And on another end, a little bit concerning. I have very few concerns about this offense. I think they'll be fine. Goff didn't play his best game, threw a horrible pick when the Tigers, jumping ahead of myself, when the Lions were in field goal range. But look, Amon-Ra's not going to have 3 catches like next week. Like this, they're going to be just fine. They have so many weapons. And ultimately, Jameson Williams was incredible. He made up for it. And, you know, this offense didn't play their best game. But when I think of what this offense can be when it is a fully operational Death Star, if they can get Jameson Williams going, this becomes an offense that is borderline unstoppable with the weapons they have. I mean, it will be the definition of pick your poison. If you have to worry about Amon-Ra and J-Mo on the other side of the field, and you got to worry about Laporta and Goff and these running backs in this offensive line, I mean, Jameson Williams was the Lions' best player offensively tonight. I mean, he was an absolute game changer, looked like the player that we saw just dominate the SEC. He was a first-team All-American when he was at Alabama. That was an inspired performance. If nothing else, despite some setbacks at points from the offense, seeing him play the best game of his career, I think is a huge sigh of relief for Brad Holmes. I think it's a huge sigh of relief for this fan base. But the downside of this game, outside of Goff's turnover, which was, I mean, uncharacteristic of him and just something you can't do. You cannot have it. Almost threw another one as well. But, I mean, this guy, he's been in the league too long to force a throw like that. It nearly cost him the game. But the thing that bothered me and still kind of gets on my nerves is that I was immediately reminded of how annoyed I get by Aaron Glenn defenses. And I don't think it's meant to be their identity of bend, don't break, but for 3 years now, we have seen this defense, I feel like, and this is an eye test thing. I'll have to go back and look at the numbers, but at least tonight, I think I got a pretty good assessment. I see him get gashed. From the first snap of the game, Stafford had the ability to hit short pass after short pass after short pass. The field started to open up. Cooper Kupp had a monster game. I mean, they got lucky that Puka was injured. I really hope that he ends up being okay. I mean, the guy was such an electric player as a rookie a season ago, and it didn't really seem like they ever adjusted. They gave up chunk plays. They gave up short yardage plays. They did do a solid job in the red zone. They held them to a few field goals, and they did get an interception in the end zone. Huge play by a friend of the program, Kirby Joseph. But as I brought up in my post-game video, Aaron Glenn defenses to me give off the illusion of a defense that should be giving up like 35 points. And yet you look at the scoreboard at the end of the game, like, oh, they only gave up 20. I mean, I bring it up all the time, but last year, the 2 playoff games they won, Puka and Mike Evans had monster games for the other team. Like, the kind of games where had those teams have won, we'd be talking about them as one of the best individual performances in the history of their franchise. And they still found a way to win. And I just think over time, and I think the San Francisco game, or at least the second half of it last season, was kind of a reflection of this. Over time, I don't believe that that's sustainable. They're going to have to force more turnovers. They're going to have to get more pressure on the quarterback. And keep in mind, the Rams had a shit ton of injuries in game 1. I mean, I thought Hutch was getting in the backfield, only had 1 sack, but that defense has a tendency to get on my nerves. I give them credit for not breaking, for not allowing more points in the red zone. And really, that's been a defining factor of both games that they've played against the Rams in the last 2 years. That includes the playoff game. I mean, last year, Stafford had a big game. Puka had a huge game. They held him to 3 field goals, and on the other end, they brought it up in the broadcast tonight. Every time the Lions were in the red zone in the playoffs against the Rams last year, they scored a touchdown. Tonight kind of told a similar story. I think one thing that Lions fans can take a lot of comfort in is that they come away from this game 1-0, having not played their best football. And look, it is hard to win a game in the National Football League, and it's even harder to win a game in the National Football League when you're playing a quality opponent and you don't play your best football. Right? I thought defensively they made mistakes. The secondary had a rough game. Terrion Arnold had a very forgettable first game of his NFL career. He's going to be fine. He's a rookie, but made some mistakes. Brian Branch did not play a particularly great game, but they still found a way to scratch one out. And I think it just speaks to how different this has been over the last several years, where the one thing that always, I mean, not the one thing, but one of the things that always bothered me about the Detroit Lions for so long is that at the just slightest glimpse of controversy, they would fold like a fucking lawn chair. You're going to take body blows in this league, and you're going to take body blows in sports. The heart of a champion is determined by how you respond to those body blows. And do I think they're a little bit lucky to come away from this game 1-0? Maybe, but you know what? You make your own luck in this game. There's a reason why in past years, past decades, the Lions would have so lost a game like this, whereas this version of them found a way to win. Culture's different. The atmosphere is different. And I think as pedestrian as Goff was tonight, you know what? They really weren't moving the ball in the second half. I give credit to the defense for stopping Stafford there. They got the ball back and they drove down the field. They didn't score a touchdown, but they tied the game. And ultimately, they got the ball back. And then Ben Johnson just totally locked in with that offensive line and the running backs. And David Montgomery just came alive in overtime. That was really incredible. That to me was one of the most dominant moments in the history of Ford Field. You saw it the entire drive. It was just feed them, feed them, feed them. And they didn't get too cute, which I appreciated. There is nothing in football more demoralizing than when you have an offensive line and a running game that can just wear the opponent down. And that's exactly what we saw in overtime. The last point I want to make, it goes beyond the game itself. Great to see the Lions win. Really tense game, incredible atmosphere at Ford Field. But I don't know, man. Maybe I'm getting all sentimental and all sappy. It is just the home opener for the team, but it is so cool to see the kind of love that broadcasters and players and fans are giving Detroit right now. I mean, I know this isn't the case, but it feels like the whole country is behind that city right now. Not just for the Lions, but for other teams. I mean, when we were in it, I remember even pointing this out. There was a period of time, and I don't remember exactly how many years specifically, but there was a period of time where each professional organization in the city of Detroit was severely lacking in hope. And it sounds crazy, and it shouldn't be this way, but especially when you're talking about the Midwest, the blue-collar cities, it just hits different. When your sports teams are bad, everything just sucks. Like, it does bring down the mood of an entire city. It can bring down the mood of an entire state. And I really think that this Lions core has really tapped into the identity of the city. I think they've tapped into the identity of the fan base. And you know what? They keep playing games like that. The fact is, they have consistently earned the respect of their opponents and consistently earned the respect of the league. I remember for so long when people would say, oh, the refs hate the Lions, the NFL hates the Lions. And as much as I wanted to come to their defense, and don't get me wrong, they did get hosed in that playoff game against the Cowboys, I always said the NFL should hate the Lions. They stink. They're an awful product year in and year out. You see more and more breaks go the Lions' way. And that's because good teams with good coaches and good culture, they make their own luck in this game. And that's exactly what the Lions did on Sunday. Huge, huge win to begin the season. Doesn't get a ton easier. You got the Bucs next, who I think are continue to be underappreciated. They got consistently better as the year went along last year. I think Baker Mayfield, I might have to do a video about this at some point, is the most disrespected quarterback of this generation. Like, he's been given up on by, the Browns gave up on him. And I mean, really, I don't want to make this a full NFL segment, but the Browns would be a fucking Super Bowl contender if they still had this version of Baker Mayfield on the team. I mean, Deshaun Watson stinks, but I'm not going down that road. It'll be another tough game. And look, it speaks to something I've talked about from the beginning of the year, which is everyone's now gunning for the Lions. This is not the jumpstart young team. These guys are veterans now. They've been through the NFC playoffs. They know what it takes to make a deep run through the postseason. You're going to get everybody's best shot. They definitely got the Rams' best shot tonight, and they were able to find a way to win. Impressive stuff. Okay, moving on. We are going to end talking about Tigers, and it makes me very happy that we can do a Tigers segment in mid-September, talking about them having a reasonable, semi-reasonable chance of competing for the postseason. That makes Chris Castellani a very happy boy. But we are going to talk about the college football teams in this state, and we're going to start with Michigan, because I would say Michigan, despite having the least successful game of the weekend, I would say gave us the most material to talk about. There's a lot to break down. Look, I was not inspired by the Fresno State performance at all. And the reason I wasn't inspired was because the issues that I figured this team would have from day fucking one, they had. They didn't have a quarterback that looked impressive at all. The offensive line had to be completely rebuilt. I thought the defense looked really good. And as I said last week, I figured that the defense would be able to keep them in pretty much every game. Well, I was wrong about that, because defense didn't do shit on Saturday. Michigan loses to Texas 31-12. And this is a fascinating one to break down, in my opinion. First off, my number one takeaway, Texas is insanely good. Like, for a long time, man, people forget about it, and people talk about it with Michigan, and it applied to them as well. But, Texas made the national championship in 2009 with Colt McCoy. After that, for a long time, they were kind of just there. They had a few good years here or there, but they really weren't a power for quite a while. Sark has that train rolling again. I mean, they reminded me a lot of Michigan last year. I mentioned this in my post-game video, where you kind of look at that roster and it's like, where's the exploitable weakness? They have speed, they have athletes, they were very gap sound. I was really impressed by their defense. Now they were facing a high school quarterback. We'll talk about that in just a second. But they're a team that's going to compete for and potentially win a national championship. I think Sarkisian's done a wonderful job there, kind of rebuilding that machine in Austin. And Quinn Ewers, obviously, potential Heisman candidate for quarterback. I thought he played close to a flawless game. Really didn't force anything. Receivers got open. The money plays, the third down plays from the first series, they made every single time. Michigan's defense could not get off the freaking field. And when you have an experienced quarterback and you have experienced playmakers, they're going to be able to make those plays. And that's exactly what we saw on Saturday. But from Michigan's perspective, while I was uninspired by the opening game of the season, they did come away from it with a 20-point victory that was closer than the final score would indicate. I came into Saturday's game against Texas, as I often do, feeling a little bit better than I thought I would, because I started hearing those rumblings from the fans of, well, they didn't want to show Fresno State everything because they were saving it for Texas. First game jitters, maybe they were just getting some things out of the way, tightening some screws. And you know what? This defense is really good. So maybe they will find a way to keep Michigan in the game. And that hope was dashed like 5 seconds into the game. I'm probably being hyperbolic there because they did miss a field goal on the opening drive, but it was very clear. Again, it reminded me of the games Michigan would play last year. It was very clear that one team existed on a different field than the other. It is a bad loss. It's a bad loss against a really good team. But I could almost not overlook it because I'm disappointed by every loss. But my big takeaway is that how I feel about the next 10 games and potentially more for this team has changed drastically in just 8 quarters of football. Look, I came into this year thinking 10-2 potentially. After game 1, I said, okay, well, this is probably a 4-loss team. Now, I mean, I see nothing from this Michigan offense that makes me think we're going to see like any sort of improvement here. I think that this is very comparable right now to the 2017 season. Now, I will defend the defense to a certain extent and just say that's maybe the best offense they're going to play. If it's not them, it's going to be Ohio State. Like, I think that for the most part, in a majority of the games that Michigan's going to play, they're going to have a schematic and just talent advantage defensively. I don't think they're going to get beat up the way that they did on Saturday against Texas. Texas is just that good of an opponent. But what I think of is the 2017 season with Harbaugh, where Michigan did have a really good defense. They even played Ohio State's offense really tough that season. And like they lost the game to Michigan State where they gave up only 14 points. But the fact is that team consistently shot themselves in the foot with the quarterback carousel. It started with Spate. He got injured. It went to O'Korn. He was terrible. You bring in Brandon Peters, then he gets injured. There was never any sort of consistency. And I was a J.J. McCarthy guy from day one when he stepped on campus, right? And I have continued to be. And even with the people who tried to invalidate what he brought to the program, it has been abundantly clear over these first 2 games just how important he was to this program and especially to last year's team. The one thing you could say about JJ, even if you felt like he was somewhat underwhelming or maybe won't be a great NFL product, the guy was accurate and he was in sync with his receivers. You've gotten the impression over these first 2 games that Davis Warren has, and it's because it's a fact, just has not played a whole lot with this first team offense. I mean, the receivers aren't really getting open. When they are getting open, he's missing throws. Colston Loveland had a bad fumble. There was a route that I don't know what happened. I don't know if Loveland ran the wrong route or if Warren just threw a bad ball, but it ended up being an interception. In 8 quarters of football, this is what scares me. 8 quarters, this team has had 2 sustained drives. They've had some long field goals. I guess if there's any positive that comes from these first 2 games, it is the fact that the special teams has been pretty sound and pretty solid. That always is something that doesn't matter, at least to me, because I've seen special teams derail games and seasons in the past. But beyond that, in 8 quarters, they have had 2 sustained drives. They had the 4th quarter drive against Fresno State that ended with the Colston Loveland touchdown, and they had the garbage time touchdown to Samaj Morgan in the 4th quarter against Texas. Besides that, they have not moved the ball consistently at all. And even if the defense plays better, which I think they will throughout the season, I just don't know where the production is going to come from because I just don't think that you have a quarterback that's going to be able to get these playmakers the ball outside of Loveland. And Loveland's going to get a million touches. First off, I'm worried the guy's going to get injured. I mean, he's getting thrown the ball 12 times a game. He's taking huge hits. But I think there are playmakers here. Like, I know Tyler Morris is a solid receiver. I know Samaj Morgan can be a solid receiver. But the fact is, if you don't have a guy who can give him the ball, I mean, I think back to the Shea Patterson year. Now, Shea was significantly better than what we've seen from Davis Warren, but that wide receiver room was loaded with Tariq Black and DPJ and Nico Collins. Nico Collins has been the stud of the century for the Texans, and they just didn't have a quarterback that could consistently get them the ball in space. And I think we're seeing that this year. And even beyond that, because I knew that there would be quarterback issues. I think that Michigan, coming off the heels of a national championship season, I'm not going to say got complacent necessarily, but I think that when you have the kind of run that they've had over the last 3 years, which was remarkable, a 40-3 stretch over a 3-year, run for any program is incredible. I think that you kind of become accustomed to the idea that things are just going to work out. And the fact is, if you are an elite program and if you're an elite coach, you have to keep going back to the well year in and year out and never relent. I don't know if I've told this on a podcast before. Maybe I have. Maybe I did on last week's show. I don't know. I've definitely told this story. But Greg McElroy, who used to be a quarterback at Bama, he was the starting quarterback the year that they won the national championship in 2009. That was Nick Saban's first title at Bama. No, they beat Texas in the national championship. And in the locker room after the game, Nick Saban said, "Hey, just letting the freshmen know, that second half, that's not really what we do here." After winning the national championship. Like, that's how locked in that guy was to just get better every single day. And I think that Michigan, with the offseason they had, were just like, well, we'll promote Sherrone and it'll work. And Sherrone will find his staff and it'll work. And okay, yeah, we probably could have found a way to get a quarterback in the portal, but we didn't, but that'll be fine. And okay, yeah, we're rebuilding the offensive line, but you know what? We've been great. Everything's gonna work out. That's not the case. That's not the case because I don't think this offensive line is anything great. We know the quarterback isn't anything great. And dude, legitimately, and I feel like I'm maybe doing too much sky is falling down like hyperbole here, but there's going to be games where if they give up 2 touchdowns, they might lose. I mean, I don't think that they have a legitimate Big Ten quarterback on this roster, and I don't think that's going to change. I don't think there's going to be a Jake Rudock situation where he starts to come along a little bit over, over the course of a season, because there's 3 levels of quarterback that we've seen at Michigan. There's the elite, which is really JJ and maybe Henny and nobody else. There's the pedestrian, the Wilton Spates, the Shea Pattersons of the world, and then there's the unplayables, the John O'Corns, the Brandon Peters, and right now the Davis Warrens. I think Sherrone is going to kind of have to coach his ass off here over the next 10 games if they want to get this team to 8 or more wins. And if this was Harbaugh, I would probably have a little bit more faith, but we have no idea. And I'm not saying he can't, but we have no idea if Sherrone Moore knows how to coach a football game or knows how to motivate a football team. He was the acting coach for a team last year that was a player-led group that was just determined as fuck to not lose. I mean, that team played and went about their business in just such an admirable way throughout the entire season that I'm not going to say you didn't need a coach, but I'm saying by the time we got to games 10, 11, and 12, they had that thing humming. It's hard for me to say, oh, Sherrone won them those games. And, he put together a staff that was okay, I guess. The staff didn't show any promise on Saturday. So, look, I love Michigan football, and Michigan football has built up a lot of goodwill. And, dude, I'm still watching highlights from the last 3 years. I still love this program, and I still think that at some point things will get figured out. But right now, I am very surprised that I'm having this kind of segment this early into the season. Does it negate anything that's happened over the last 3 years, dude? No, not at all. But if we're talking about this season, and I'm going to transition here to talking about Michigan State, but right now it is, by the time you guys listen to this, it'll be September 9th. Right now, I'm having my concerns about whether or not this team can beat Michigan State in year 1 of a new regime, given what I saw on Saturday. So tough sledding for Michigan. I do think they'll bounce back this week. They have a relatively easy game, but after that, this is the thing that we've talked about with the Big Ten expansion. There's a lot more, hey, you got to get up for this games. And I think that a team like last year's team would have been able to handle that. I don't know about this group. Now, what is the identity of this football team? Because I don't think they have the offensive line for it to be smash football. I don't know what the fuck they're doing with the running backs. I mean, Donovan Edwards has been a space cadet the first 2 games. It's troubling. It's troubling. Go blue, obviously, but and I hate to be so negative about a program that's had so much good happen to them over the last 3 years, but I also can't blow smoke. I mean, that was a startlingly sound defeat at the hands of the Texas Longhorns. Okay, sorry, I'm rambling, but I do want to transition to talking about Michigan State, who pulled off an upset victory on Saturday against Maryland. The thing about Maryland football, man, that's so bizarre. Maryland football has athletes. They recruit some pretty good position players. Over the last few years, they've had a solid quarterback. They usually have some wideouts or some running backs. Where they lose games consistently is that they shoot themselves in the foot more than any other program in the country. They would have beaten Michigan last year if not for the fact that they had, I think, a punt blocked, a fumble that was returned for a touchdown, and they threw 2 picks. And in similar fashion, we saw them in this game against Michigan State, in a game where both teams made a lot of mistakes, made a lot of errors. I mean, Aiden Childs, as good as he was at points, threw 3 interceptions. Ultimately, it was the team that made the fewest mistakes that ended up winning, and that was Michigan State. For the second game of the Jonathan Smith era, that's extremely encouraging. Now, I already know where this is going to go amongst Michigan fans, because sometimes I get criticized for saying that I'm too critical of Michigan, while at points being too complimentary of Michigan State. But as I've talked about this so many times until I've been blue in the face, you have to judge a team solely based on what your expectations are for them. For instance, if this was 2021, and the Lions would have opened the season with a 20-17 loss to the Rams, we'd all be saying, hey, that's a pretty good showing for the Lions. I mean, they didn't win, but they're playing a good team and they competed against a good team. Maybe the future's bright. If that would have happened today, we would have viewed it as a huge collapse, because over the last few years, our expectations of the organization have changed. With Michigan State, It's much different. This is not the heart of the D'Antonio era. Okay, Jonathan Smith inherited a pretty brutal situation, and through 2 games, they've shown significantly more promise than I think a lot of people expected. And the fact is, they didn't play very well in that first game. I mean, they made a lot of mistakes. They had a lot of penalties, and I thought while there were still mistakes that were made, the one thing that we saw from Michigan State on Saturday was legit explosiveness. I mean, Nick Marsh is 17 years old, dude. I mean, he's a freshman making play after play. The analogy I used on Twitter, and even the Michigan State fans who hate me agreed with this analogy. This Michigan State football team is going to be that reliever that comes out of your bullpen that throws 105 miles per hour, has no idea where the ball is going to go. And that means that sometimes he will be electric, sometimes he'll be maddening, but usually he'll be pretty entertaining. It's the Gregory Soto of teams. And I think for the first year of the Jonathan Smith era, for that to be their identity, that's okay. And I think, I've talked about it with Michigan, but man, I'm going to hammer this point home forever, dude, because when I'm going to go back to Michigan here for a second. When I saw what J.J. McCarthy was able to do at quarterback, I immediately realized how milquetoast, vanilla, and pedestrian the previous string of Michigan quarterbacks truly was. Even the good ones like Cade, or Denard had their serious limitations. A great quarterback, especially in college, can completely change the dynamic and completely can change the ceiling of a team. You really think that Auburn team with Cam Newton in 2010 was going to be a 14-0 team if they would have just had some random dude playing QB? No. They were probably a 5-loss team if not for the fact that they had a guy who had a transcendent season. And I bring that up because I think Aiden Chiles will be a guy who's going to make mistakes. I think there's a lot of raw talent, but there's talent. You see the arm strength and you see the mobility. You see a guy who, pending injury, and you obviously don't want that to happen, is going to be the quarterback here for quite a while. And he's going to continue to grow and can continue to develop. And even if Michigan State has trouble developing the offensive and defensive lines, even if they do have some trouble developing the secondary or the running backs, I'm not saying they will, it's just if they do, you're going to have a connection there with Chiles to Marsh that I think is going to be, can carry them in some games. And you saw it carry them against Maryland. Maryland had a field goal with a chance to go up 10. They missed it. Michigan State, on first play, deep ball to Marsh, ties the game. They drove right down the field. They showed a lot of poise on Saturday. I came into the season saying that this was a 7-5 team. I'm sticking by that. I had them winning the Maryland game before the season started. In fact, I actually had this team starting 4-0. I think the Boston College game is probably more likely to be a loss now than it was several weeks ago. I think Bill O'Brien's going to do a pretty good job there. But state fans should definitely be inspired, because I think that what you're seeing is a more unselfish program. And I mean, I hate to compare him to Deion Sanders, but like when you are a head football coach of a program, the number one thing that you have to do is understand that you are a part of something that is so much bigger than you. I know that Jim Harbaugh was a grade A weirdo, but I legitimately think we saw it at points that when it mattered, the players and the program came first. I don't know, even at their most successful, if you could have said that about Mel Tucker at Michigan State. I think you will definitely be able to say that about Jonathan Smith. I think for a guy who's only 2 games into his coaching tenure, he's done one of the most important things, which is it seems like guys are bought in. And especially coming off of the heels of what was a very tumultuous tenure, that's a good step in the right direction. So a lot of positives for Michigan State, not a lot of positives for Michigan. I mean, I feel like people are going to come away from this episode thinking that I'm a Spartan fan, but I was legitimately shocked by what I saw from Michigan on Saturday. Like I just because I'm not seeing that high of a ceiling. Like at least coming into the year, I'm like, well, if this goes right and this goes right, they can be great. I don't know. I mean, that looked like a 6-loss football team on Saturday. And I still think Michigan State could be a 6-loss football team too, but I think they've showed at least more potential and upside with the skill position players that they have. So definitely a mixed bag in terms of the college games over the weekend in the state of Michigan. Let's talk a little bit of Tigers, because as of the time of this recording, the Detroit Tigers are 3.5 games back of a playoff spot. And now it's legitimate. Now it's okay. They can do something here, because they got a 3-game series coming up against the Rockies, who stink. They've been one of the worst road teams in baseball this season, maybe even the worst. And then you play Baltimore, but there's a chance you win or sweep that Rockies series, things get even more interesting. This team, to their credit, has earned the right for us to be interested. And I said it in my post-game video yesterday, bizarrely, despite the fact that they played god-awful baseball for about 2 months. This team has kind of turned into the team that I thought they would become before the season started, which is not a great club, but a club that would be scrappy. And if the ball bounced the right way for them, could be playing some really meaningful, fun games deep into the season. While this team was at one point, I think 9 games under 500, the turnaround here has been pretty remarkable. And it's a turnaround by the fact that they're getting production from guys I hadn't heard of a few months ago. I mean, Brant Herter and Gunther and Hannafy and Velasco. I mean, these guys were afterthoughts. And I think that's just like, it is so important that I hammer this point home, because every major league organization needs an identity. And I think for the entirety of the Al Avila tenure, his whole thing was, we want pitching to be our identity. And let's be honest, outside of a few good players here and there, it never really was. They never really had a dominant bullpen. They never really had a dominant rotation. When you look at the way that this team has pitched throughout this season, even when they haven't been healthy, this is now becoming a place that I think pitchers are going to want to come to. I remember when I interviewed Skubal, he talked about that he feels like this is becoming that pitching lab similar to what Scott Harris built when he was in San Francisco, and that's very exciting. But even beyond that, you're seeing depth develop within the organization. Parker Meadows has gotten big hit after big hit, and I mean, his ceiling is so high, and I think next season is going to be so huge for him. I want to see him put it together over a full 162-game campaign, because outside of Riley Green, I've said this from the beginning, I think he has the highest ceiling of anybody on this roster. I think he has an all-star ceiling, legitimately a 5-6 WAR ceiling with the bases he can steal and the defense he can play and the power he can hit for. He can be a legitimate 5-tool player, and he has been really ever since getting called back up. This is exciting, and even if this doesn't end in playoffs, which I still don't think it will, this is a huge stretch for this baseball team, because what I didn't want from this season was for them to walk through the last 2 months of the season with their pants around their ankles. We will at least be able to say they played meaningful baseball. And for this young core, and I've talked about it with the Lions, I've talked about it with the Tigers, this is so true what I'm about to say. None of these guys, especially now that Miggy's not on the team, none of these guys know how to win at the major league level. None of these guys have experienced the full grind of 162. None of them have experienced a playoff push. They learned how to win these games. And I think that one thing about A.J. Hinch's teams that we've seen all 4 years here, as bad as they've been at points, and there's been some very ugly moments, I think there's a level of mental toughness that I really appreciate. I hate saying this because it was such a fun era, but I think at points, the Leland-led Tiger teams had a tendency to space out when it was very inconvenient for them to space out. The ultimate example I'll use, man, is, look, David Ortiz hit that grand slam in I should have set this up with a trigger warning. He hit that grand slam in 2013 to tie the game against the Tigers when they were about to go up 2-0. I think if they get Ortiz out, I think they sweep, right? But the fact is, they went back to Detroit with 3 home games, and the pitching lined up. It was Verlander, Pfister, and Anibal Sanchez after winning the ERA title. John Lackey was on the mound for Game 3, and the offense didn't show up. They didn't show up. They lost Game 2 twice. And in a best-of-7 series, that's going to fuck you. This team lost a game on Friday that made me as angry as I've been after a Tigers loss in years. I can't do it. Shelby Miller cannot be on this team next year. Like, maybe the nicest guy. I do actually think they're going to pick up his option. I can't do it. This team would be in fucking first place if not for Shelby Miller. He's taken 8 losses as a reliever. Don't get me started. They responded with 2 workmanlike, efficient, great pitching performances on bullpen days. Ty Madden was phenomenal yesterday. That shows me a lot, because at some point in the future, God willing, this team will be in the postseason. And no matter how good you are as a major league team, at some point in October, things are going to go backwards. You're going to lose a close game. You're going to cough up a lead. You're going to have a walk-off that's going to happen against you. Things will get ugly. And how you respond to that will be the sign of a championship team. And I don't think this team has championship talent. They definitely don't. This is going to sound corny, but I think they're developing a championship heart. And at some point, that will pay off again. God willing. I have a take here, and it has not been made public, and it could be a take that I could see myself rescinding at some point in the future. I think we can all agree the Tigers have moved in the right direction in 2024. and we want to see them make something of a big splash in the offseason. And the fans are going to hate hearing this. I don't see them spending big money. Unless they extend some of the players that they have, I think that we're going to go into next year with Jace Young as a third baseman, and Jay Hen will be back, and like a lot of these guys will be in their same positions, hoping to develop as they've developed this season, right? I think if this team really wants to set a tone, I'm not saying it needs to be Pete Alonso. You could utilize the trade market, but I would go into next season with a different first baseman than Spencer Torkelson. I think he got one hit yesterday. I want to say he was 2 for 26 on this road trip. He was 0 for 6 with 4 Ks in the extra inning game. The thing is, and the reason why I'm so hard on him now is the sample size is fucking massive. He's almost done with his third year of the big leagues, right? I am willing to put up with another year of Jace Young development because I think he can get there. I think he deserves more time. He's earned more time. I can say that about Colt Keith. I can say that about Justin Henry Malloy. It is hard for me to say that about a number 1 overall pick who is almost 3 years into his career and has a wins above replacement that is well into the negatives. Like it ain't negative 0.1. It's like -1. I think that this team is very close to really playing for something, and you could argue they're kind of playing for something this year. But next season, if this team is in a playoff hunt again, I can't see this guy popping up to second base with runners on second and third again, dude. I'm not saying cut him. I think, with injury, he can be the first guy you call up. You can DH him. You can have him play first. But that is a position where you need pop and you need power and you need consistency. And Spencer Torkelson has a massive sample size that shows he just has not provided that. Even when he was hitting in the early part after his call-up, he just seems like the same player. You blink and he's down 0-2 in a count. He pops his batting average with runners in scoring position and the bases loaded is historically terrible. And I think that we've reached a point with this organization where the improvement we've seen from other guys is apparent. It's not apparent with him. Ask me at the end of the season, maybe I take back this take, and ultimately I do think they run it back with Torkelson, but man, it becomes more noticeable when the team is actually succeeding. Because you see, yesterday was the prime example. You saw the line was moving with Parker and Carey and Riley and Vierling and Colt Keith and then Torkelson fucking strikes out. If that's not a microcosm of where we're at with this core, I don't know what is. Try not to be negative. Tigers are playing very good baseball. Go sweep the Rockies, and this can be really interesting. All right, I think that will do it for today's episode. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, notify. Same with Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, click that little ring. That way you will be notified every time that I upload a video. I'm really trying to grow this right now. And the way to do that is, I'm going to need your help. If you guys appreciate the content that I'm putting out, hit that like button, retweet, share it with your friends. We're really trying to grow. I'll say this, I'll get a little bit real here. And I talked about it last week, but I think that, maybe personal things got in the way, but I think I lost sight of what I should be as a content creator. And what I should be is somebody who's, 1, creative, and 2, promotes the teams he loves. And it starts with the love that I have for the Detroit fan base. And we're going to try to grow that. I promise you, while I will have my skepticism, you will get no segments on the show of me talking about moving the Detroit Pistons to another city. It's been a while since I wrote that, and I can comfortably say that was written in a manic state. No excuse. But I think the content has the potential to be much more positive and much better. And I think the way that some of these teams are playing in the state right now is definitely a reflection of that. So thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. I appreciate all the support, always have, and we'll continue to. We will be back. We got a Chris and Company coming up this week with Rob Friedman, the Pitching Ninja. Really fun interview. It's actually one of my favorites that we've done. I don't know how the audience will respond to it, but I really enjoyed it. And more content coming down the pike. So stay tuned for that. You guys are the best. Have a great rest of your day. Go Lions. Go Tigers. Peace and happiness.